They say if you see her at night, you'll hear the sound of skin cracking, like dried leaves underfoot. I wish I didn't believe it, but I saw her once, Princess Omalicha, the pimple princess. Her face was so swollen with boils that it barely looked human. It wasn't always like this. Omalicha was once the pride of our village, Oro. People would travel from all corners of the land just to catch a glimpse of her beauty. Her skin was flawless, smooth like polished clay. Her eyes sparkled like the stars that lit up the night sky. And her smile could soften even the hardest of hearts. I was just a young boy then, but even I remember how people would stop whatever they were doing just to admire her as she passed by. But beauty, as they say, can be a dangerous thing. It all started the year she turned 17. That was when Omalicha's obsession with her reflection began. At first, it seemed harmless, just a young girl fascinated by her own beauty. She would spend hours by the river, gazing into the water. The river in our village was known for its clear, glassy surface, like a natural mirror. People would often go there to admire themselves, but no one spent as much time there as Omalicha did. It became a habit for her. Every morning before the sun rose and every evening as it set, she could be found by the river, staring into the water. The villagers began to whisper. Some said it was just the innocence of youth, that she was simply captivated by the beauty she saw in herself. Others, though, felt uneasy. They said no one should look into their reflection for that long, that it could invite something unnatural. But who were we to question the princess? She was the king's daughter, after all. I remember one evening, the last evening I saw her before everything changed. It was the night of the annual moon festival, a time when the entire village gathered to celebrate the full moon and give thanks to the spirits of the land and water. The festival was always grand, with music, dancing, and feasting. Omalicha had always been the centerpiece of the celebration, her beauty making her stand out among the villagers like a star in the sky. But that year, she was late. The drums were beating, the fires were lit, but the princess was nowhere to be found. The king sat on his throne, looking anxious. His eyes kept darting toward the path that led to the river, but he said nothing. The queen, on the other hand, could not hide her worry. She whispered to the king, urging him to send someone to find their daughter. He hesitated, not wanting to cause a scene, but eventually, he nodded. That's when I was chosen, along with a few others, to go and look for her. We followed the path to the river, torches in hand, our footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets. As we approached the riverbank, we saw her. Princess Omalicha was sitting by the water, just as she always did. But something was different. The way she sat, so still, so silent, it was unsettling. Her head was tilted slightly forward, her eyes fixed on the water's surface. One of the elders, Yuzo, called out to her. Princess Omalicha, the festival has begun. Your people are waiting for you. But she didn't respond. She didn't even turn her head. She just sat there, staring. We moved closer, unsure of what to do. That's when we noticed something strange, her reflection in the water. It didn't match her movements. While Omalicha sat still, her reflection was shifting, as if it had a life of its own. The reflection's eyes seemed to flicker, its lips twitching into a smile. A cold chill ran down my spine. Princess. Yuzo called again, louder this time, but there was still no response. I could see fear in her eyes. None of us had ever seen anything like this before. That's when Omalicha finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. It's staring back at me. Her words sent a wave of dread through us. Yuzo stepped forward, reaching out to the princess, but before she could touch her, Omalicha's body began to tremble. It was as if something was crawling under her skin. Then, before our eyes, her face started to change. It began with small pimples, barely noticeable at first. But within moments, they grew larger and angrier, spreading across her once perfect skin like a plague. Her cheeks swelled, her forehead bubbled, and her lips cracked open. Her reflection in the water twisted into something monstrous, grinning back at her with wicked delight. She screamed, a sound so full of pain and terror that it made my blood run cold. She clawed at her face, trying to peel off the boils, but the more she scratched, the worse it got. Her skin tore like old cloth, revealing raw, inflamed flesh beneath. We were frozen in place, too terrified to move. Yuzo shouted something in the old tongue, a prayer to the river spirits, but it was no use. The curse had already taken hold. When the king heard what had happened, he was devastated. He ordered his men to carry Omalicha back to the palace, but by then, she was no longer recognizable. The beautiful girl we all knew was gone, replaced by a creature whose face was a mass of festering boils and cracked skin. The king called on healers and wise men from across the land, but none could cure her. They said it was the work of the river spirits, a punishment for staring too long into her reflection. The river, they said, had stolen her beauty and given her a curse in its place. The palace was sealed off after that. No one was allowed to see the princess. Rumors spread through the village like wildfire. Some said she had gone mad, tearing out her hair and screaming at her reflection in the mirrors. Others claimed that her reflection now moved on its own even when she looked away. But no one knew for sure, because no one dared to go near the palace. I remember the first time I heard it, the crackling sound. It was late at night, and I was walking past the palace on my way home from the fields. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees. But as I got closer, I realized it was coming from inside the palace. It sounded like dry leaves being crushed underfoot, or like someone crumpling old paper. The sound sent a shiver down my spine. That's when I knew the stories were true. The princess was still in there, her skin cracking and peeling away, bit by bit. Now, years later, people still talk about Princess Omalicha, the pimple princess. Some say the curse can be lifted if she stops looking at her reflection. But others say it's too late, that the river spirits have already claimed her soul. Either way, no one in the village dares to look into their reflection for too long anymore. Not even me.